Hello and welcome to a new series by me. This is my first YouTube video I'm ever doing. It's how to program in C++, and this is for absolute beginners. So if you've never programmed before, you've never seen any programming before, then this is the video for you. We're going to start at the very beginning, the basics, and we'll work our way up through, and hopefully you can learn some valuable information from this series. So obviously this is lesson one. So we're going to use Visual Studio for this, and you can go and download Visual Studio yourself. So if we go ahead and move to the next slide, you can download Visual Studio from this link. Make sure you install the community version. That's the free version, and it does everything you want and more. Or if you're having trouble with this link, you always just type into Google Visual Studio 2019 download, and it'll be one of the first links that you see. Okay, I'm not going to go through the process of setting up Visual Studio. You can probably figure that out yourself, but let's go ahead and show you how to create a project or your first code within Visual Studio. So if we go to right here, this should be what you see when you first download Visual Studio 2019. So we're going to create a new project right here. Okay. You should see somewhere in here something called empty project, and it's for C++. You can look right there. We're going to do that. So we're going to empty project, and you can name your project something, whatever. I'll just call it lesson 1 C++. Something like that. Doesn't really matter. Okay, create it. And you should see something like this. So currently there's no code here. So go over here to your source files, click on that, and then right click, hit add, and then add new item. Okay. It'll come up with this. You want to add a C++ file. Your name should end in a .cpp. That basically means that this is C++. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to stay with source.cpp and just add it. Okay. We have our code right here. There's nothing here, obviously. We haven't typed anything. So let's go back to this PowerPoint real quick. If you need to, this is the little instructions right here I added. You can always pause the video and look at this if you need to. Okay. Now we're ready to set up our first C++ program. So this is our really default code for right now. This is what you'll always add within your program, to get it working. We will go over what all of this means later on. This is more not really advanced stuff, but it's not really advanced at all. It's just you need to learn some basics before we get to all of this. So you have hashtag include IO stream. IO basically stands for input output. This includes a library of stuff you can add to your program. This is using namespace std. This is int main, return 0, and then the ending curly bracket. We'll get to what all that means later, but for now, let's just go ahead and add that into our program. Okay. So we want to do hashtag include IO stream, right? Using namespace std. Okay. And then we'll do int main, and then return 0. So this is what our program will always look like for now. This is kind of like the default look of it for C++. Like I said, don't worry about what all this means yet. We'll get to it. Don't worry. Okay. Don't let it freak you out. Okay. So let's go back to our PowerPoint, and let's start talking about variables. Those are like the building blocks of what we need to do to first start learning program. So, introduction to variables. So think a variable is something that stores a value. Think of like a box. You know, you put stuff in a box and it stores something. It's kind of like a variable. A variable will hold a value. It can be numbers, characters, you know, phrases. Um, so I listed out 4 really basic variable types, but we're going to focus on these first 2 right here, int and float. Int is short for integer, all right? And int stores whole numbers. So whole numbers are, you know, 2, 5, 10, and 20. You know, that don't have decimals. It's just whole numbers. Float stores numbers with decimals, so like 2.5 and 4.64 and, you know, 109.2555. Float's purpose is to store decimals. You need to distinguish that from int. It's very important. You don't want to be holding decimals with an int because that will not work. So now we got that. We'll get to char, which is short for character. You know, stores characters AXE, and string stores words and phrases. We'll get to that later on, but like I said, we're going to start with these first 2. Okay, so now that we know like the different variable types, what can we do with that? So when you want to create a variable, all right, you always start with the variable type. These 4 right here are the variable types. There's much more, but these are the 4 basic ones we'll start with, and we're going to focus on these 2 today. Okay, so you always start with the variable type, and then you want to name that variable. So you can name it whatever you want. I recommend naming it something meaningful. So like if you're storing a number, don't name it something crazy like Sunday afternoon, because that doesn't really correspond with a variable type, which would be an int in this case, since you're storing a whole number. So name it something meaningful like my number, or number 1, or num, which is short for number. All right. And after you have your variable type and then the name of your variable in there, you can really just end it there. You've already declared your variable, so you end it in a semicolon. A semicolon is very, very important. Do not forget to put semicolons at the end of your lines, because if you do, your program will not run. You will get lots of errors, and it'll be a mess. So it's very important to remember to add a semicolon at the end of each line. I mean, there's certain cases where you don't have to, like you'll start with like a curly bracket. We'll get to that later. But after you do this, you've already declared your variable. You're good to go. But you can also initialize it to something. You can initialize it to anything really, as long as it corresponds with your type. So when you want to initialize it, you can do your variable type, and then name a variable, and then you'll equal it to whatever value you want to. So let's say we have a int here, and then we have our name variable. We'll set it equal to a whole number, so like 7 or 37 or something like that. All right. So enough of the PowerPoint. Let's get to the program. So let's say I want to create a variable that holds the number 5. Since we're holding a whole number, we want to use the int variable type, and then we'll name it something, whatever. So we'll call it my number. Okay, and then we want to equal 5, so we'll equal 5. Make sure you end it in a semicolon. Okay, that's very, very, very important. Okay, let's say we want to hold a decimal. So remember, you have to use a float for that. So float my decimal equals 2.6. Okay. Remember, float is equal to decimal. Int is equal to a whole number. Make sure you get that locked into your brain. All right. So we successfully declared 2 variables. So that should be easy enough. Let's see. Yeah, like I said, we'll get the char and string later on. Those aren't hard at all. But now that we've declared two variables, what do we actually do with those? They really aren't doing anything. They're just holding values. I mean, nothing really meaningful right now. Let's go on to our next slide, which is the last really topic we'll talk about today. Simple arithmetic operators. So you have your plus, your minus, your multiply and divide, your four really basic arithmetic operators. You, you can use these operators on numbers or variables. So you can add two numbers together, obviously, but since variables like your int variables are equal to numbers, it makes sense that you can add two variables together, since they're essentially just numbers. So let's give an example. So let's delete these. And let's say we have two variables. So int number 1 is equal to 5. We have int number 2 is equal to 10. All right. Let's say we want to add these two numbers together, right? So that gives us 15, obviously. So what you can do is you can create a third variable called int number 3, and it can be equal to number 1 plus number 2. It's basically the same thing saying 5 plus 10. So you could do number 1 plus number 2. And that would give you 15. Now, that's cool, but how can we actually, see it for ourselves? But we'll get to that in the next video. But I just want to give a really brief, easy introduction. I really don't want to overload you. But next video, we could talk about input or output stuff. We won't talk about input yet, but we'll talk about output. But let's see. You can, if you wanted to, you can also do. Let's declare two floats. So float decimal 1 is equal to 0.5. We have float decimal 2 is equal to 1.2. You can do the same thing with this. Just make sure you're declaring a float. Since you're adding two floats together, you want to make sure that this one is a float. So decimal 3 is equal to 0.5. Let's multiply them. So multiply your star, your asterisk symbol, which is shift 8, and it'll give you asterisk 0.5 times 1.2. You can do that. So that's basically it for today's lesson. It's just a very brief introduction, but we'll get to more meaningful stuff next lesson. Feel free to leave any comments about what I should do, better, or if I should maybe add more stuff into a video, or this is my first video. I'm trying my best. I don't want to overload you with lots of information, but I feel like this is a good starting point. And I just realized I should have done decimal 1 times decimal 2. My bad. Just saw that. So I mean, it's basically the same thing, since decimal 1 is equal to 0.5. It would have given us the same answer. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.